Alright, good evening YouTube. In today's video, we're going to be continuing the programming series in which I'm going to kind of discuss how I kind of understand my training, how I kind of view training, how I structure each workout, and the purpose of every exercise within my own programs and the lens in which the lens that I use whenever I review other programs. Like this is just kind of like how I understand training, but also how I actually like implement it and coach others when I do make programs for them. So let's get into the video. So when it comes to training, there are certain terms, or when it comes to training, programming, or anything like that, there are certain terms that I use, and I understand them in a way that might be more aligned with, let's say, a conjugate method or a concurrent method because I am a power builder. I'm not just pure size, I'm not just pure strength. I like to be more so in the middle because I like lifting heavy, but at the same time, I know what it's like to just bloat max and just go full on into a dirty bulk and in the sake of strength, and then only to realize that sure, all my numbers have gone up, but so has the number on the scale, and I kind of want to have a balanced medium between the two. So when it comes to programming, when it comes to how I understand these terms and how I use them, the terms that I use commonly when I structure my workouts is okay, what is the main work or the strength work? What is the supplementary work and then the accessory work? And then also the other things I need to kind of touch on within this video is what is the difference between a compound exercise and a isolation exercise insofar as it relates to programming, insofar as it relates to your ability to structure a workout that's going to give you optimal or best results. Okay, so let's talk about main work or strength work. So the reason why I usually refer to it as either or is because for whatever reason, the moment I say strength work, people who have a bias or goal more related to hypertrophy are more likely to just kind of like mentally clock out. They're like, strength doesn't even matter for size, and then they just go from there. The issue with that is I've discussed many times on this channel just how important strength is for the natural lifter. Generally speaking, if you want to get bigger, you do have to get stronger. That doesn't mean you only need to use the squat, bench, or deadlift as the proxy or as the measuring stick of progression. They are just options. More so for the hypertrophy-focused power builder or just a hypertrophy-focused lifter, they need to select a wide variety of exercises, a wide variety of rep ranges, and gradually increase the load that they're lifting within each rep range, each exercise, right? That's what it means to get stronger. Now, when it comes to programming, this exercise, whatever exercise, group of exercises you put into this bracket or this category should be the focus and base of the actual workout. So let's say you are on an upper lower split. The first exercise you do should be whatever exercise you determine to be the most important to building your upper body. Generally speaking, it's going to be a big heavy compound movement such as an overhead press or a bench press variation. Generally speaking, for novices, you're going to kind of stick closer to the most specific version or variation of a lift. But the training decisions that you'll make for the rest of the workout are going to be geared towards the existence of that exercise within the day. So let's say, for example, your main work for the day is the bench press. You're not just going to keep doing other variations of the bench press thinking that that's going to be an optimal workout, because the more variations of the bench you throw in, the less effective each one gets because of the amount of fatigue you have accumulated prior from the work prior, right? So when it comes to how you actually organize your training, you need to kind of think of it in this way. With the strength work, this is where you're going to be trying to push the most amount of progression. The strength work is really great at growing the muscles. It is because they are compound exercises, because they are using multiple muscle groups, and because they can be loaded very heavily, they're going to be very useful in building a big base, a lot of high quality dense muscle. However, that's not the end all be all. If all you needed was a certain exercise, then minimalist programs would be way more effective than they actually are, but they're not. To a certain point, the compound movements are going to be great for developing strength, but they're going to become very useful just for maintaining size, because what's going to happen over time is whatever anthropometry or leverages or advantages you have as a person, as an individual, they're going to kind of reveal themselves if you stick too loyally to a certain variation of a lift, which is why in the next slide, we're going to talk about supplemental lifts, because weaknesses reveal themselves as you get stronger. It's not something that reveals itself very early in the beginning. And that's why, if you're a novice, this should be highly specific work. Now, if you are more advanced, this should still be very, very goal specific. So let's say your goal is a big bench or a big chest. You want to be using exercises that allow you to get the most amount of stimulation. And because of that, it's going to be a variation that also comes with a high amount of fatigue. So if you're a novice or intermediate, as I was kind of hinting at, most of your work should come from this exercise. However, as you advance, as you get stronger, what's going to eventually happen is that you're going to be too strong to do so much work with that variation or with the main variation of a lift, which is why you often see advanced lifters go into programs in which they deadlift heavy less frequently, or they do a rotation. So one week is heavy deadlifting, the other week is heavy squatting. So they go maybe 14 days without a heavy pull from the floor, because they're just too strong and they need more time to recover from these hard efforts. But that doesn't apply to novices, and that very much does not apply to early stage intermediates and most late stage intermediates, right? So the thing that also needs to be taken into consideration there is the fact that joint and connective tissue recovery has to be considered, because relative and absolute loading will become high. So in the very beginning, if you are a novice, relatively you're lifting heavy because your strength potential just is not there. But the absolute weight on the bar realistically isn't really all that much. Now, the reason why I bring this up is because this is it's almost unnecessary, almost, because when it becomes an objectively heavy weight is so far down the line for most people that it's kind of unnecessary to even discuss, right? But at the same time, we can't ignore the fact that objectively heavy weights do exist, right? A 3-plate bench, a 4-plate squat, and a 5-plate deadlift. These are heavy numbers, regardless of your size, regardless of your like height, weight, whatever, gender, who cares? If you can lift those 3 numbers, like you are strong. Bottom line, you are strong. And if you are a woman lifting those numbers, then you are holding world records. So good for you. I think a good way to kind of like go based off those numbers, like I think like 80%. But that's just a number I'm pulling off my head. But who cares? Just aim for those same numbers. Like even if you don't reach them, you'll hit really impressive numbers anyway, right? But because these movements do allow you to lift the most amount of weight, that also means they're putting the most amount of weight on your joints and connective tissues, which is why as you advance, main work is main in name, not in, let's say, composition of the workout, where you're allocating your effort, right? It's main work in the sense that it is the focus and base of your workout. It's what's motivating decisions in your programming, in the program itself, and in the workout itself, right? So let's get into supplemental work. So when it comes to supplemental work, right, the reason why I refer to it as supplemental work is because think of what it means in like mathematics, right? It's what completes the angle, it's what completes this shape, whatever. I'm horrible at math, so this is probably a horrible analogy, but who cares? This should be work that is very specific towards whatever your main goal is. If your main goal is a bigger bench, if the goal of the workout even is just a bigger bench, then your supplementary work should serve that. If your main goal is a bigger chest, then let's say you do barbell bench pressing and then you do maybe chest dips or dumbbell bench pressing, something that gives you a high potential to load, has carryover to the main lift, but also targets the main muscle or the goal of whatever that workout is, right? So here you're going to find that you're going to use exercises that have a better stimulus to fatigue ratio. And when it comes to stimulus to fatigue ratio, I feel like it's something that a lot of people kind of care too much about, because they like to think about how do I make a workout with the most amount of highly optimal stimulus to fatigue ratio exercises. In my opinion, that's the wrong way to look at it. The way you should look at it is your first exercise should have the most amount of stimulation, but at the cost of having high fatigue. Your next exercise should have a exercise that is very similar in stimulation or slightly below, but the fatigue is much less. if you just kind of go toward this approach of how do I get the best stimulus to fatigue ratio in both spots, you're going to find that you're just going to choose two very light exercises, not progress them very much, and just kind of not work all that hard, and that is going to limit your ability to get stronger and bigger. So don't be averse to working hard. Don't be thinking that you should only be using exercises that have a high stimulus to fatigue ratio. There is an argument to be made there, but it's something that I feel like it's exaggerated too much, and I think you just need to be reminded, yes, you should work hard. You should be using exercises that do tire you out, that do make you sore, right? Or at least to some degree. Now, the next thing that is worth noting with supplementary work is that it usually will target the muscles that are prioritized or weakest when in relation to the main movement, right? This is why for novices, it's not really all that important. So because it should be a close variation, it should have direct carryover and has a similar potential to be loaded as the main lift, the necessity of supplemental work for a novice really isn't there because nothing will build up the main lift like the main lift for the novice. A novice doesn't need to have barbell bench pressing and close grip bench pressing in the same workout, in my opinion. Reason being is because their bench is just weak, their triceps are just weak. You don't need to be so concerned with your weaknesses when you yourself are just weak overall. I think that's something that a lot of people like need to hear right now because oftentimes they'll think to themselves, my bench isn't where I want it to be because of my triceps. My bench isn't where I want it to be because of my shoulders. And oftentimes, like, yes, that could be the case, but at the same time, you haven't really gotten everything that you can get out of the barbell lift. Your technique isn't even all that good. Your ability to progress on it, like your consistency with the lift isn't really all that good. So it's like I feel like there's things that you're like kind of putting the cart before the horse. I think that's how this that phrase works, but I've made that mistake before, right? But anyway, you don't know what your weakness is. You're just weak. Just focus on the main work. If for a this is why kind of like for a novice, I usually include something like a maybe a barbell bench press and then an overhead press or an overhead press and dips, because these are two movements that do have some degree of carryover to them, but they're not direct carryover. They're not close variations of one another. They do have similar potential to be loaded, but they're completely different movements. But at the same time, they're just big, heavy compound movements that are going to help build the structures because that's what they need. They just need to continue to build the structures that are there because that's going to be the limiting factor, and that's what's going to be the deciding factor of the amount of size and strength that they do develop, right? So the way that supplemental work differs from accessory work is that progression here is more similar to the strength work or the main work. You're going to be trying to progress mainly in load and reps. I don't think I touched on that in the last slide, so I'm going to kind of like go back real quick because that's something that's going to be very important here. With main work and supplementary work, the progression is going to be very similar. However, you should be working in different thresholds, right? So the main work, if you are strength focused, that's going to be, let's say, in the 1 to 6 rep range. If you are more hypertrophy focused, that might be more so in the 4 to 6 or 4 to 8 rep range, right? Now, with your supplementary work, since your main work, if you're strength focused, is 1 to 6, your supplementary work should take place more so in the 6 to 12, maybe 6 to 10 rep range. It kind of depends on your preferences of how, like what becomes high volume to you. Me personally, after a set of 10, I think anything beyond that is just cardio. So that's just nothing factual backs that up, but it's just like a personal preference. So that's why usually I go to the 6 to 10 rep range after that heavy main work. But for more hypertrophy focused lifters, that range is much different because you are going from the 4 to 8 to maybe the 8 to 12, 8 to 15 range. So going back to this slide, you want to make sure that you are still able to progress in a very similar way, meaning load and reps. The idea of plus ones. Steve Shaw from Massive Iron is a great proponent of this, and it works. It's very useful. Go for plus ones. Try to add 1 rep each week. If you can't add weight, add a rep. Do something that induces progression. That's what's going to be the determining factor of if you get bigger and stronger. Are you trying to improve in some capacity each workout? It doesn't need to be as blatant as just adding 5 pounds to the bar. You can do micro loading and even just adding reps across sets, doing sets across. So maybe do 3 sets of 6, 3 sets of 7, 3 sets of 8. Try to have a system in which you're able to improve, and that system is very similar to the main work and the supplementary work. For the accessory work, that doesn't really need to be the case. The next thing is that the supplementary work should build structures that are involved in a very specific way to the main lift. So let's say your main exercise is the bench press, then your supplementary work could be the incline. It could be the close grip. It could be something of that nature, because you now know there is a weakness you have to attend with. So for example, I know in juggernaut training systems, usually it's kind of like a top set with the main variation of a lift, and then your back off sets are done with another variation. So let's say you're pulling conventional, and then you do back off with stiff leg deadlifts or deficit deadlifts or pause deadlifts, something of that nature, right? That's kind of like the idea here. Your main work is done at a specific threshold. It's going to motivate the decisions made later on into the workout, and their supplementary work is going to serve the main work, and it's usually going to be something that has a better stimulus to fatigue ratio. It's going to target the muscles that are weak, but that implies you have to be strong to do this. You have to have a baseline of experience. You have to have a base of muscle and strength to kind of definitively say, yes, I have a weakness. I'm failing at the same spots. My progression is stalling because I'm leaving something unattended. The thing is, you don't know what that is until it basically it reveals itself. Obviously, you can try to cover your bases as much as possible, leave no stone unturned, and I do highly recommend and advocate for that. But at the same time, you have to be very mindful of where you're currently at in your training career, in your training life cycle. If you're a novice, your recoverability is not all that high. So just use other exercises that are more fitting toward the fatigue that you can actually tolerate. If you're more advanced, then use these exercises, because you have to. You have to use higher stimulation exercises because that's what's going to work for you. For a novice, that's not really the case. You can do small work and get big results, but for the more advanced lifter, they have to do big work to get big results. It's like, what time is it right now? It's like past my bedtime, so I'm like kind of like running out of brain cells. So that didn't sound all that smart, but I hope you understand what I'm trying to say. So let's get into accessory work or just bodybuilding work, right? So the purpose of accessory work is that it should potentiate future performance. So here I just wrote potentiates performance. And if you look at something like the Matt Wenning approach, where if you look at his power building approach, a lot of it is just like Wenning warm-ups for accessory. You do that in the beginning, and then you do main heavy work, and then you're done. Not my favorite way to go about power building, in my opinion, but you know, the results do speak for himself in his case. But at the same time, like, the underlying utility is still the same. It potentiates future performance either in the workout itself or later down the road, and it builds the structures involved, but not necessarily movement. So let's look at the example of tricep pushdowns, right? So tricep pushdowns, they will give you bigger triceps, and big triceps do help you in a big bench if and only if, which is why if is spelled with two F's rather than just one, because that means if and only if you also bench. So you can't just do tricep extensions, max out the stack, and expect your bench press to be like your one rep max bench press to go up. Just if you did absolutely no benching, you can't expect that. Likely not to be the case. Maybe there's an argument to be made, but just who would ever train like that, and who would like I don't think anyone would train like that. But just kind of like the thought experience I want to kind of give with you, right? So this is a work that is very low in specificity, but it still provides great benefits. It targets the muscles that you actually want to build, and accessory work should be present in novice and advanced training. If you actually want to build a muscle, you do need to target it. Anyone who tells you otherwise is lying to you, is trying to fool you, and is just being very dishonest. If you want big arms, you have to isolate them. If you want, if you do have a weakness in your quads, you need to isolate them. So there's that, right? Another point that should be made is the fact that it does help prevent injury, in my opinion. If you have strong biceps and strong triceps as built up through curling and extensions, you're going to find that benching doesn't beat you up nearly as bad. At least that's what I found. I've neglected arm work for most of my training career, but it wasn't until that I actually started taking arm work seriously that I noticed that my ability to bench more regularly and the recoverability that I get from it does occur, and it is very useful. So if you are strength focused, don't skip out on bodybuilding work. It's going to help you more than it is going to hurt you, in my opinion. Now, the closer you get to a meet, the closer you get to the point in time in which all you need is a one rep max, yes, take that volume away because that added recovery is going to benefit you. But in off-season training and in most of your training throughout the year, you should include it in there. There's no reason not to, in my opinion. And also, it allows you to get more volume for muscles that can still handle it. So let's say, going back to that bench press day workout, right? So you have a day that's specific towards building the bench. You do a barbell bench press, then let's say you do another bench press variation, whether that be dumbbell, a grip change, an angle change, something of that nature, right? You might be all done benching. Like you can literally not bench with a meaningful amount of weight. Like it's just the weight that you're using is just absolutely not something that's going to carry over to a bigger lift, right? But your chest can still get a lot more volume and recover from it, so that way you can actually like build that muscle even further. So you throw in flies. So that's where accessory work comes in. If you were to just do fly after fly after fly, like chest dumbbell fly, machine flies, like low angle, high angle. If you just were to kind of like shove a workout with all of that, yes, you're shoving a lot of volume to that muscle, but at the same time, because you're taking away any time that you spend doing this, you're taking time away from something else. You kind of need to make sure your priorities are in check, which is why I structure things in such a way that it's main work or strength work and supplementary work and then accessory work, because it gives you that framework of what should be prioritized, what should take up the like biggest spots in your workout, what should where should most of your time and effort be allocated. Each of these things are important. However, let's say you do happen to be in a time crunch, what should be cut out? Accessory work and then supplementary work. What you do want to get to in the future though is to get to a point where your ability to do the main work, supplementary work, and accessory work on a consistent basis is the norm. It's not something like, well, if all that matters is the main work, then why can't I just do main work? It's more so the situation is forcing you to focus on main work, but it's not. It should not be the norm, right? Now, the next thing I want to point out here with accessory work is the fact that load progression is important, and you should be trying to attack these movements, like whether they be bicep curls, lateral raises, tricep extensions, upright rows, these smaller movements with the same amount of intention as you do the main work. However, progress will be a lot slower, and you don't need to periodize it. Like, you're not going to go through phases in which you are doing like 60% of a tricep extension max, then 70%, then 80%. You're not going to be doing that with accessory work. You're just going to be sticking to a number, let's say like 50 pounds on an extension, and then you're going to use a wider range than you normally would. So I do have videos on my channel where I talk about rep ranges and what exercises fit into different rep ranges and how isolation exercises kind of break that a little bit. And you're going to use them in a very different way than you would, let's say, a compound exercise. And you're only going to add load when you can top out the range. So let's say you are using the 8 to 15 rep range rather than the 8 to 12. Once you can do, let's say you're trying to go for 3 sets, right? If you can do 2 sets of 15, add weight. Or do 3 sets of 15 and then add weight to extend out the amount of time you stick with a certain weight for longer. That's kind of how I recommend going about it. But load progression is still important, but it's just not something you need to periodize. You're not going to go through phases in which you go from a light curl to a medium curl to a hard curl. I don't think that's going to be very useful. Maybe in terms of volume, so that way you can actually recover. But generally speaking, you're not going to undulate loads for something like a bicep curl. At least that's not something I do. But that is it for accessory work, right? So now let's kind of talk about compound versus isolation exercise. I kind of touched upon this like a little bit in the previous slides, but to me, it's much easier to explain what an isolation or what a compound exercise is by explaining isolation. And to me, an isolation exercise just refers to exercises that target or bias a specific area while limiting the contribution of other related and local muscles. That's just me trying to sound smart, but that's kind of how I understand it. So I kind of entered a debate with a close friend of mine about training, and one thing that we kind of had to sort out was just that when we mentioned isolation exercises, we meant completely different things. To me, a hack squat is an isolation exercise. A leg press is an isolation exercise, but a close grip bench and an overhead press is not. So here's why. In a hack squat, right? You are going to be angling your body in a specific way. You're going to be placing load on your body in a specific way, whether you're using a Smith machine or an actual hack squat machine, where the load is preferentially put onto a specific muscle in comparison to, let's say, the basic movement pattern that is usually used to represent. So the main variation, right? In a squat, you're going to be using glutes, hamstrings to an extent. It's not a reliable way to build up your hamstrings, but they are being used, and quads, right? But in a hack squat, you're not going to be activating those muscles in the same way, but the quads is going to be taking a lot of work. Same thing with the leg press. The quads are going to get a lot of work in the leg press, but the other muscles, not so much. Whereas in a squat, it's kind of like distributed a bit more evenly, just a bit more evenly, not so much. But in a close grip bench, right, your chest is still being activated. Yes, a lot more of the tension is being placed onto your triceps, but so it is also going to your upper pec. So it's to kind of say that it's an isolation exercise is not really, it doesn't really register for me because the same muscles are being used and to a very similar degree, just in different ratios. Whereas in a hack squat and leg press, almost all of it is going to one muscle, almost all of it. Whereas in close grip bench and overhead press, even though there is a muscle that does take on most of it, you're still going to be getting a lot of work on other related muscles. So that's kind of like where my view of isolation exercises like kind of comes in. And I could be wrong. This is just how I understand it. This is just kind of like how I communicate it. So if you don't follow along with this thinking, just leave that in the comments below and we can have a discussion about it, and you can kind of like tell me your thinking about it, because I know for most people an isolation exercise is a single joint movement. And for me, because I never found single joint movements to be super like if you put them in a program, they're literally going to be like at the very end. But if you kind of like tell me that, you know, hack squats, leg presses and stuff like that kind of have a value in place, then I'm going to put them in there as well. And it just like kind of like sorts things out in a way because of like loading, effort, and everything like that, right? So gonna have to like unpack a lot there, but we'll just leave that for another day, right? And then the final point is that a compound exercise where movements that you can load a lot, that allow you to, or movements that allow you to progress in load with a very high potential while also hitting a lot of muscles and building a lot of muscles, then those should make up most of your work. And that point actually like like helps me clarify a couple things in my head. So sorry that I'm kind of all over the place. If you leg press, what is going to grow? Your quads. If you hack squat, what is going to grow? Your quads. If you close grip bench, what is going to grow? Your triceps, your chest, and your shoulders. They're all going to grow if you just do close grip benching. What is going to grow in your overhead press? Your shoulders, your triceps, upper pec, maybe a little bit of your upper back. So to say that it's an isolation exercise, in my opinion, doesn't really like play through, just because of the amount of muscles that are going to be developed by implementing it. But anyway, that's an aside. Let's move forward. And that actually carries me into my conclusion and kind of a summary of everything, right? Your workout should at least consist of strength work, which is the most goal specific work. That is the easiest way to understand it. It's what's going to motivate training decisions. Then you want to go into supplementary work, where you're going to have exercises that serve that goal very, very closely, but they don't have as much loading potential as they would the strength work, and they still can be loaded heavily and still target the muscles that you desire to build. Then you have accessory work, so your bodybuilding work. This is work that should only be done after everything else. Reason being is because if you were to do the accessory work first, your strength work will suffer, your supplementary work will suffer. You kind of want to make sure that you're getting the bang for your buck first, so that way when you go into the accessory work, you're still getting a benefit from it and you're not taking away, so it's not becoming a cost elsewhere in the program. So that is kind of how I structure each workout. And if you kind of want help with this, you can contact me for coaching, or if you feel confident in your ability to start programming for yourself, you can wear the most anabolic and most simplistic, minimalistic fitness apparel on the market on my website. So that's it for this video. Thank you so much for watching. My name is Crossa King, stancetrain.com, and I'll see you in the next one. Peace.